As the years go by since the release of DMC 5, fans are constantly wondering what the next step is going to be. The rumor mill has been going pretty crazy, especially since this Dan Southworth interview.
2 weeks ago, actually 3 or 4 weeks ago, they hired me to play this character. I don't want to say any titles or anything because I'm known for my spilling the beans. They asked me to do my voice the way it was back in 2004 or whatever.
While I personally take it with a grain of salt, it's got the interest of a remake sparking back up for a lot of people. It doesn't seem unlikely at all that at some point we will get a DMC remake.
Not in a million years.
Not like that one. We live in this era of remakes, and most of them are pretty good. Capcom, especially with the Resident Evil franchise, has been putting some zingers out, and even more recently, the Silent Hill 2 remake proved to be quite the underdog when the game dropped and people realized, oh wait, it's actually good. Remakes are kind of a sketchy thing. Remakes should theoretically exist to take something outdated and revamp it for modern audiences. That's not always the case, as just having a popular IP is enough to warrant a remake for something. The original could still be a masterpiece, but who cares if it's old? I never had issue playing older games, ones well before my time. People automatically assume that you just have this nostalgic lens, being the only reason you could enjoy an older game, even if I just played it for the first time recently. That said, there are several factors to consider when thinking about remaking a game. A big one that's perhaps not considered enough is the availability of the game. Oftentimes people will say, well, if you don't want to play the remake, the original is always there. Well, that's not always true for everybody. This is one thing that DMC definitely has over other titles. You can quite literally still play this game on any modern system. So availability is not an issue of concern. I guess we should talk about the other major issue. Is the game still playable? And by that I mean, is the game still good, or has it aged like ass? There's a few major aspects of the game to evaluate. The story, the gameplay, the visuals, and most importantly, how fun it is. Many of you have probably heard the story before, but yes, DMC originally started out as a very early concept for the fourth Resident Evil, this time being directed by Hideki Kamiya, the director of Resident Evil 2. He wanted to take the franchise in a direction to be an action-adventure story that was, in his words, cool. Kamiya teamed up with the writer Noboru Sugimura, who also had an extensive history with Capcom projects to help devise the story. The early prototypes for Dante actually did bear similar powers, but was more based in biotechnology. It didn't take long for Kamiya to realize that he was brewing something entirely different here that just didn't quite fit the Resident Evil franchise, although traces still persist. Even Dante still has some Leon-ness to him. Kamiya traded biotech for demonology, and took great inspiration from Dante's Divine Comedy, as if Dante and Virgil weren't dead giveaways. Kamiya wanted to make a protagonist who fit his bill of cool. Long coats, flashy weapons, and even flashier attitude.
Block off, Featherface, or you can stick around and find out the hard way.
And a biggie for Kamiya, he doesn't smoke. He tried to keep the character grounded instead of being a complete show-off so that he would be likable to the audience. Now, being that this is the first installment, it actually goes pretty light on the lore. Everything was being made up here as they were creating the game, and we don't really get lengthy exposition dumps or hours on the setting. We get a little history lesson on the Demon Sparta, and we're thrown right into the action, leaving the player to ask, who is this guy, and what is Devil May Cry? The game's manual offers some tidbits of extra lore, but nothing super noteworthy. There's a letter here from Enzo, the original Morrison role of the series, that we learn about in the light novels later on. Interestingly, Enzo points out Dante won't take a job that doesn't interest him, but as soon as it turns supernatural, he's far more keen to get involved, even if there's no reward involved. This is actually pretty important character analysis, perhaps more useful when we discuss the anime. But we can infer that this is a guy who loves this part of his life, the action, the wild lifestyle of demon ass-kicking. The game opens with a mysterious lady, not that one, who gives us some exposition dialogue on Dante before sending him to Malay Island to stop the evil demon king Mundus from escaping hell and wreaking havoc on the human world. Devil May Cry shop is pretty neat and definitely should be suspicious to any normal person stepping in here. Right off the bat, we start off pretty goofy, and that's how you know you're in for a good ride.
Time to go to work, guys. Even as a child, I had powers.
Even in the first cutscene, Dante's getting stabbed. And not long after that, he gets skewered by Alistair. He has to rise up to get the sword and its hilt out of his torso. Yikes. It's a good indicator of how invincible our protagonist here is, though. This is where we start to feel very Resident Evil-like. We have a set location for much of the game, this castle. The imagery of the island came from the game's art team spending a couple weeks traveling Europe and Spain, photographing Gothic locations. In terms of the game's visuals, it's definitely one of the best looking games in the series. I know, that must sound crazy, but hear me out. DMC 5 in particular is a beautiful game graphically. It's got rather bland palettes. DMC 1 is such a vibrant game. It really showcases the beauty in this gothic style, and the HD remaster really cleans up nicely too, showing all the little details and the textures that were really impressive for 2001. It may not look like a movie like DMC 5, but it definitely has its own pleasing style. The character models aren't too shabby either. There's definitely some age to the models, sure, but again, this is 2001. Better graphics and frame rate, they play so good. You could even make an argument that DMC 1 has aged better in the visual department than DMC 3 in some regards. And over the years, this has grown to be one of my favorite Dante designs, and may even be a contender for my favorite. If the castle's design isn't exotic enough for you, there's also some underwater segments, caves, forests, a goddamn pirate ship, and of course, the underworld. All of which are unique and exciting environments. The game has an interesting mission structure. Unlike the newer games, you can't just select your levels. You start the game, and you play it till the end. And then you can play it again on newer difficulties that we'll talk about later. There's also these sections that bridge between missions, such as the game's opening before starting the first level. Now this is something I would like to see improved on. A level select is just always a nice option to have, especially so one wouldn't have to play through the entire game just to get to one section. Mind you, the game itself isn't super long. An experienced player could beat the story in a couple hours, and a newcomer would probably take just a few more. There's a total of 23 missions with 12 secret missions hidden within the levels. The missions vary in length, some taking only a couple minutes, and some could take around 10. During these missions, you'll explore Mundus' castle, gaining tidbits of lore along the way while facing off against some interesting enemies and bosses. The bosses in DMC 1 are not a super strong point. They're all pretty straightforward and easy to loop around. The first boss is Phantom, a big-ass lava spider. The game lets us know early on how badass Dante is, and he certainly shows no fear to the enemies as he openly taunts them.
What a big surprise. I hope for your sake you got something inside that big body of yours.
The other bosses include Griffin and Nightmare. Griffin is this big old-ass bird who loyally serves Mundus, showing us that the Demon King has little to no compassion for his minions. Nightmare is a sludge puddle, a bioweapon created by Mundus. It's got lasers and spikes and a disco ball that you can smack. It can also eat you and you have to fight inside of him. And of course, there's Nilo Angelo, the mysterious Dark Knight strong enough to go toe-to-toe with Dante. After the third encounter, spoilers, we learn that Nilo Angelo was Virgil, who had been enslaved by Mundus. As far as the game tells us, we are expected to believe that Virgil died at a very young age, and this is especially cruel for Dante, who just had to kill his brother. Now DMC 3 took some creative liberties with retconning to make Virgil a more fleshed out character, and some of this vagueness became far more meaningful. Eventually Trish, who's revealed to be a sort of clone of Dante's mom, betrays him, and then immediately turns a leaf when he saves her. Kinda clunky, this whole process in the writing, but it works nonetheless.
You may look like my mother, but you're nowhere close to her. You have no soul. You have the face, but you'll never have her fire.
And then you face off against Mundus. The game actually did pretty well to hold off on the appearance of the Demon King until late game. For being the final boss and the big bad, we don't really see him or learn much about him. But throughout the pain that he's caused poor Dante in this game, hell yeah, we want to kick his ass. Then we get one of the most famous boss fights in video game history. Probably the most innovative boss fight in the series. The game ends with Dante and Trish escaping in a Resident Evil 4 precursor and then teaming up together for Devil May Cry.
5 minutes.
More than enough.
After the first completion, you unlock hard mode, which is a little more challenging, I suppose, but then you unlock the series staple, Dante Must Die mode. This is usually the difficulty that's supposed to be the most challenging in DMC games, that really pushes your skills to the limit. You must face off against more difficult enemies, even early game, and they have an extra defense that will make you work for killing them. Even still, DMD mode isn't too bad comparatively to the later games. As for the game's combat, it's interesting. It certainly introduces all the series familiars you would expect. The core of the battle gameplay is your style score, how well you string combos till reaching S rank to maximize your rewards for defeating enemies. The combos, however, are very limited in this game, being that it is the first one. There's no weapon wheel, you get 3 different swords that are slightly different, and you have Ifrit, which lets Dante show off his hand-to-hand skills. As well as different guns such as Nightmare or the grenade gun, the most powerful damn weapon in the game. So without a weapon wheel, you have to pick your favorite sword and gun and go with that for a combo. You can switch these at any time in the menu, but it's not how you want. Regardless, this is the first game, and for what it's worth, the combat is not nearly as clunky as I remember. It's very limited, sure, but it's also very responsive and can be pretty challenging in a fun way. There's a decent amount of enemy types to face off against as well. The Marionettes, the Sin Scissors, Shadow, Nobody, Fetish, Frost. It's enough to keep the game interesting, that's for sure. All in all, DMC is a pretty small game, but it's not short and fun. Because of its age, it could be a more challenging experience, but it's not unplayable by any means. The biggest enemy against you is the camera. Kamiya wanted to use a dynamic camera opposed to Rezi's signature fixed cameras, and it's not quite there yet. As is custom with these types of games, you'll find yourself constantly having to adjust your stick to keep your character from running off into a wall. It's like playing a tank-controlled game without being able to use the D-pad. Camera aside, the movement is pretty good. Jumping on things suck though. Landing certain jumps can earn you rewards. Just about any seasoned DMC fan knows early on you're supposed to make this jump on the statue here to get a lot of orbs. Come on. Ah, damn it. Damn it. Shit! These aren't glaring issues, but you can't really ignore them either. So the big question, does DMC need a remake? Personally, I think need is a bit of a stretch. The game still shows a lot of ingenuity, and very easily why it's considered one of the most influential video games of all time. Now, would a remake be a bad thing? Hell no! You bet your ass I would be there day one if they did a remake. There are so many options and things to improve on, it actually leaves me wondering how they could do it. Given the now set standard by the newer games and how limited DMC 1 is, I want to know how they could even have it go on par. DMC 1 is pretty much a masterpiece on its own, but it does stand awkwardly when looking at the entire franchise. That's where a remake could shine the most. It could better connect the story to other entries. Maybe we could get more stuff with Virgil and Dante. Maybe even dig deeper into their past. Fuck it. Give it a special edition where we can play Virgil's transformation into Nilo Angelo. Do we need that? No, not in the slightest, but Virgil fans will want it. I personally wouldn't mind seeing the story get an updated overhaul, although I worry about the visual style. I'm sure a remake would look pretty, but it would probably lose the uniqueness of the original. I would love deeper lore dives, especially with Mundus. I never really cared for him as a villain before because frankly, I didn't have much to latch on to. I was more interested in Trish and the other antagonists. Mundus was just the final boss. It'd be cool to see him be more of an actual character. I'd also love to hear Ruben's take on this era of Dante's life, but given the weird relationship he has with Capcom right now, we may not get that. I don't know. So, to surmise, I don't really think DMC needs a remake. I think that it's still a good game on its own and it's still very much playable today, but I sure as hell will welcome a remake. I'm sure more people are inclined to be in favor of a remake, newer fans especially who popped in with the later titles. I already got spoiled with those games' stellar gameplay. Let me know in the comments below how you feel about a DMC remake. Or would you rather see the story press on from where it left off? If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. If you haven't already, please check out my socials to keep up with the channel. It really helps me out a lot. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.